So during this trip, I stayed with locals or I slept on buses. The buses were all well equipped with reclining chairs, phone chargers, and Wi-Fi. I didn't eat out or eat meat or fish during these days. As you can imagine, I was quite busy, just trying to see places. I wasn't contributing to any financial institutions as I wasn't earning any money, and I didn't buy anything new. I calculated my carbon emissions as around 700 kilograms in the 10 days, with the main emission coming from the single flight from London to Italy. But the flight cost was a promotion, so it only cost me 15 British pounds. So it's very little funding, financial funding of the flight company. I only used hand luggage. So I think I have a photo of this. Um, so here are the photos of Rome and the fusion between the old and the new in Venice. Oh, I don't seem to be able to find it. But yeah, I only used hand luggage. I only took hand luggage on my flight, and I waited for promotions. So the next main part of my trip was with my charity project, The Pursuit of Happiness. The main emissions from this part of the trip was the long haul flight from Italy to Rio de Janeiro. But again, this cost me less than £300 return. So again, meaning a minimal financial contribution to the flight industry. So whilst I was in Brazil, I walked most places, also to the favelas where I gave a workshop, and then later hitchhiked to Bolivia. So this is some photos from my journey. So what I wanted to include here is there were some inevitable risks, especially walking unaccompanied around the favelas. And I did realize from this that some carbon emissions are unavoidable for safety reasons. So I stayed with local people. I camped in churches, which I believe I have a photo of somewhere. We'll come back to that. So although my consumption of meat increased, as it's a staple part of the diet in Latin America, and what would often be offered by my host, I was only charging my phone once a day and was not using any other electrical devices. So that workshop that I gave in the favelas was teaching the children how to balance their carbon footprint using some of the techniques that I learned on the trip. So this involved considering my own carbon contamination throughout the day and then consciously deciding how I could balance that. For example, I would offset some of the emissions from my flight by walking and hitchhiking rather than taking any private or public transport. And when that was not possible, I would reduce my meat consumption or plastic use instead. Um, so the children really inspired me, answering all the questions really enthusiastically and understanding the interdependence between human life and the natural world, much more so than I have experienced children in Western countries being able to do that. So one experience that particularly I remember very well was I asked the question to this school group in the favelas. It was this favela. And I asked them the question, what will happen if we fail to take care of the environment? And one of the boys, the little boy standing next to me, he's only 8 years old. He just looked at me, not kind of, with a lot of emotion, but he just looked at me and matter of factly said to me, "We will die." So he had a very kind of, I found that with a lot of the children and young people, not just in the favelas of Rio, but also in the Bolivian Amazon, they had a very good understanding and connection with how we as humans are dependent on the natural world. Um, so they all pledged to think about one thing every day that they could do for the environment, whether that was bringing their own reusable bottle to school, turning off lights when they weren't using them, or reducing meat consumption, which was a staple part of the diet in Brazil. However, the truth was that the contamination levels per person were very small in comparison to the rest of the world, largely due to the restrictions of their socio-economic condition. Yet, ironically, I found was that they're going to be the first to feel the hard blow of climate change, as we heard from Ose at the beginning. And as we've seen in the news from the recent disasters around the world, um, but this the response of these children showed to me that they were much more aware and sensitive and enthusiastic about taking the necessary action. So after arriving in Bolivia, I continued to hitchhike and walk around, giving workshops, staying and eating locally. Um, so here are some photos from that. Um, Again, I found my meat consumption increased, but I offset some of this by encouraging some of the people I stayed with in the Amazon community to eat less meat and mix it with more vegetables. So when I cooked, I reduced the meat in the communal meal from 1 kilograms for 8 people to 500 grams and more vegetables. So this is a photo we were eating together. And this was the meals where I just tried to put in more vegetables. Um, the interesting thing about this was that most of them didn't even notice. I think this was more effective than trying to convert them to be vegetarian or vegan, as it came with a lot less resistance. What I found is trying to change conditioned behavior takes time and patience and compassion for both ourselves and others. So I also encourage the Amazon community where I stayed to reduce the consumption of single-use plastic, leading by example, and putting the foods that I bought from shops in my rucksack rather than in plastic bags. So now and again, I made a few trips by motorbike, but I tried to walk as much as possible and lead by example and also show like there's so many beautiful things to see on the way. I mean, it's the Amazon, so you can see these like beautiful big lily pads. Um, it was just a joy walking to the workshops rather than getting, go in there and motorbikes and missing all of these things. So here's another picture of the Amazon region. These were my favorite things there, these huge lily pads. They're just so beautiful. Um, so I bought a few necessary items for health and hygiene along the way. Um, but I managed a lot as well on clothes that friends gave me when I needed them. So for example, when I went to Saladia Uni, which I do have a photo of somewhere here. So the jumper that I've got around my waist, this is a friend that I met in Bolivia. She gave me that, and I went with gifts for them too. And the gifts were an Indian sari. So they don't have, people in Bolivia don't really travel overseas, or a very small percentage of the population do. But a lot of them really love Bollywood movies. So, as most Indian families do, we have lots of saris at home. So I took this one for her, and she was so happy that she had an Indian sari. And it's just lying in my house doing nothing. So it was something that she could use. And they also offered me things that I could use. And one of the things that I learned from this is that we lack a lot of community, the way that we live in Western countries. And when we can kind of share things, there's not so much of a dependence on money and buying new things. Um, so I also gave any clothes that I wasn't using to a community center that was helping street children. Um, so let me see if I can. Oh, I think I just had a chat message. Let me just check that. Oh, um, I think people are trying to join in the waiting room. Um, I can't see anybody. Um, uh, how do I? Hmm. Sorry, I'm just I can't see anybody in the waiting room. Um, hmm. Just write in the chat if you know anyone's trying to join, and I'll try and keep an eye on it, but I can't see anyone on my screen. Okay, so I'll just go back to the presentation. So throughout the trip, so I've got a picture somewhere of the children, that I gave clothes to. Here they are. So these are in Santa Cruz. It was very sad. These children live on the streets. So the social condition in Bolivia can be very difficult for some of them. Um, and sometimes there's a lot of rain and the clothes just get flooded. They live under this tunnel and their clothes just get flooded down the river. And there's one organization that helped them, and just any clothes I wasn't using anymore, I just gave it to that organization for these children. And again, it reminded me that, sometimes we forget that something that we don't need anymore, it has a use for somebody else, even if we think, oh, it's got a few holes in, or, maybe that's how we see it, but it might keep like a child warm that, doesn't have anything other than a thin shirt and a t-shirt. Um, so, Now, when I cycle around at home, I often see clothes and toys discarded on the street rather than recycled or offered secondhand to someone that might need it. And it made me reflect that we've developed quite an individualistic mentality, which doesn't turn to our neighbour for support, only a dependence on money to ensure that we can buy our way out of any situation. So during this trip, I gave over 35 classes. In less than 6 months and on a budget of less than £500, including flights. I also learned some hard lessons staying at a cowboy ranch and working with fishermen that helped me overcome my craving for meat dishes. I saw and felt the reality and pain and blood that went on behind the scenes to create meat dishes, rather than just a beautifully presented meal in front of me that helped break my conditioned eating habits. So now I don't eat anything fish and meat related. And I try to eat predominantly plant-based. So here, this is one of the photos that, I saw this. I've got a video as well, but it was hard for me to connect it. It's just heartbreaking. You can see here, if you look closely, so the calf is being dragged by the cowboys, and the mother of the calf is trying to help it, but it can't. It's just helpless. And you could just really feel the emotion of the mother cow, and it was really sad. And this here is where they're standing on the calf's face so they can stamp it. Um, and yeah, I found it quite traumatic actually watching all of this. And after that, I didn't want to eat red meat again. And also when you're in these communities, so I'd help cook sometimes. And if it was a meat dish, it would just be like bloody meat. And it just really kind of like hit home to me. They would laugh at me because I would just run away and they'd be like, where was this girl come from? But it really highlighted to me that I was really, I was being quite a hypocrite because I couldn't stand the thought of an animal suffering. Yet at that point in my life, I was still quite happy eating it. So that was something that I gradually had to kind of come out of. Um, I'm just going to check the chat again, just in case there is. I think Mia's trying to get in. Oh yes, I can see Mia. I'll admit Mia. Now there we go. So just drop another message if needed. Okay. So just find where I was. So I worked with a psychologist during my time in the Amazon region that took me back to meditation. It was quite interesting. I went on a meditation retreat, Vipassana, for 10 days, and my mum was ill with cancer at the time. She had terminal 3 cancer. She had a tumor. I was doing a lot of I was supporting her a lot with the oncologist and also emotional support. And the meditation retreat really helped me. I used to be very like emotional. And it just helped to bring me back to center and be able to deal with things in a much calmer way. I found it quite hard to sustain the practice. But when I worked with a psychologist in the Bolivian Amazon, there were some quite severe cases of abuse, of a lot of different problems, and I went back to meditation and I realized if you go to the root of the problem, like things like violence, things like abuse, they're all surface level. A person who's committing these things, they've got, the root is where you need to go that is causing these things to manifest. That's where real change can start happening. So I did some meditation practices while I was there as part of my classes. Um, and yeah, I think I helped the most in that area. Um, and I remember one story of a woman who'd killed her husband, and she was really condemned by the society. But the reality of it was that she'd killed her husband because her husband had been trying to rape her. So she pulled out a knife, and it was self-defense. She'd been found innocent by the court, but in this village she'd just been condemned by everybody, that without understanding the bigger picture. So I sat with her and I did some like basic yoga and meditation. She was also working with the psychologist at the time. And it was just really beautiful to see her have an emotional release, because she had a baby at the time too. And, I think anybody who has a baby can relate to the fact that if you've got all of this guilt hanging over you, how can you care for another being? And she just had this emotional release and said, this is the first time I've let go of what happened, and I can see that I don't want my children to be without a dad, but I also needed to defend myself. Am I right to say no? um so of course that's not justifying what happened, but it's also not my place to judge. And it was very important for this woman to find compassion for herself so that she could be the mother. She had a beautiful heart, but that was getting kind of almost hidden by her guilt over what happened. So yeah, that wasn't part of the talk, but I just wanted to share that story with you. Um, so I'm just going to check and make sure there's nobody else in the waiting room. No. Okay. So I think that with meditation, these are some of the children that I worked with. So this class I did on understanding our feelings and our right to feel. Something I think, again, a lot of children, and all of us really, we don't know enough about is understanding our feelings. And this was one of the meditations that I gave with the church. Um, my belief is that through meditation and mindful practices, we can change our habitual thinking patterns and connect more with the natural world and other humans that we live with. So the end of my trip involved traveling through the Bolivian Amazon, and I was really dismayed to see how much of the jungle had been destroyed to create cattle farms and slaughterhouses and cotton farms. So I have some photos of this. Find them. Uh, the order's a bit out of sync. 1 second. Oh, uh, oh, I'll maybe show you in the workshop because I don't know where they are, but it's really interesting to see. You can just see where large areas of the Amazon have been cut down, and in their place are these plantations. Um, and you just see, I was really looking forward to seeing animals in the jungle. And you do see animals, but they're dead animals by the side of the road, which is really quite sad. Um, so yeah, I'll come to that at the end. remind me if I forget, because they are quite interesting photos. So it confirmed to me that I needed to make more effort to reduce my meat consumption, and stop supporting industries that are creating this destruction. So I calculate my emissions from this trip to be around 5.8 tons, with the main emission coming from the long haul flight and eating meat. I would, however, consider that I offset a lot of that through my workshops and talks, and actions in the community, like I showed you before, encouraging others to eat less meat, use less plastic, buy less, and instead enjoy nature, through the 35 workshops that I gave. Um, these classes focused on helping people how to control their mind and cravings as well, family planning and teaching about what a carbon footprint is and how to reduce it, and why we must protect the trees in the Amazon region. So what was happening a lot is that the local people, I mean, this is my perspective, but they're often manipulated to destroy that, because they're told, well, we need to improve the economy, so let's stop farming more. And they're given a different story, when actually the most important thing for them as local people is that they can grow their food. But there sometimes isn't that correlation, that by giving away half my land to some industrial company, um, for the meat industry. A lot of our meat comes from Brazil, for example, that they're also destroying their opportunity to live from the land. Um, so they also taught me a lot about being more resourceful, making my own food and growing my own food, and living more in line with nature. So I have some photos here. So this is the first thing I ever planted, yucca, which I was very excited about. And this is me making bread, um, with this beautiful little girl. Didn't know how to make bread before, but these are things I've adopted since I've come back, and now I make a lot of my own food. I haven't grown anything because I live with my parents and they're not on board with that, but it's something I'd like to do. And the other thing that really inspired me is, there's one photo where one of the children had made their own toy, and I just found it amazing. Just try and find it. So yeah, this is one of the communities that I learned a lot from. So this girl is sweeping with a brush that she's made, from, like, so there's part of a tree there, and then there's also, it's basically made from natural resources. This is how they cook. Um, so it's all very natural. And this was a lady who's showing me, like, all the things that you can eat in the jungle, wild. Um, this is, some of the natural ways that they extract things from the plants, and from just from the jungle areas. But yeah, it's all made out of wood, and it's all, done by hand rather than using electricity. I just loved how the children, like, ran so free through the jungle. There was no, oh, a snake might bite you, which could very well happen. And they were just so happy and free. And I just thought it was really, really beautiful. So this is where they're making rice, and this is one of the other machines that they used. I think that was for honey, to make honey. So this is the child who made the toy, which I just thought was so impressive. And she just made it out of some palm leaves, and they use these palm leaves just to lie down on, and it's actually quite comfy. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you. Um, so just find where